Good afternoon. I'd like to tell you about a question that maybe is on your mind, maybe not, which is whether it pays for a country to have a monarchy or not. So the organizers of the forum asked me to include or to talk about this topic because I have done, as you'll see in a moment, some research on it. And I guess given that we're in London, it is a pertinent question to ask. So first of all, who would want to have a king or a queen, right? It's kind of a pre-modern institution. It's anachronistic, it's preposterous, it's irrational, and a lot of people perceive it as being wasteful. So a couple of years ago, I decided to gather the data and to look if countries that are ruled by monarchs have higher GDP per capita or not, when compared to other countries in the world that have other forms of government, and of course those are primarily republics, right? And little did I know that within 2 months of actually publishing the paper, Farid Zakaria actually got a hold of it. And he had a small segment in his show, GPS, highlighting the results from my paper. So I want to tell you about what was in the results. First of all, there's something really surprising about monarchies in the contemporary world. They're old-fashioned, they're traditional, they're anachronistic, but they're surprisingly resilient. So we have exactly 43 countries in the world right now that are monarchies. That's if we include the British Commonwealth countries. If we exclude them, but we keep the UK still in the mix, we have 29 countries in the world that are monarchies. Now, some of them are absolutist monarchies, okay? So they are not democratic in any shape or form. Others are constitutional, so there are constraints on what the king and the queen can do. And there's also, of course, this very important question as to how democratic is the political system in a country where there is a monarch. And there's also a lot of variation along those lines. Now, again, the question that I'm trying to ask myself here is, are they richer or poorer than countries that don't have a monarchy? And, well, take a look at just some of the countries in the world that are monarchies. Some of them are very rich, like Belgium or Denmark or Holland or the UK or Japan. Others are not so rich, but still relative to their respective regions are reasonably rich, like Malaysia or Thailand. And of course, there are some really, really oil-rich countries in the world, like Brunei or Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, that are also monarchies. And lastly, of course, we also have countries ruled by monarchs that are very, very poor, like Bhutan or Cambodia or Jordan or Oman. You can read the rest of them over there. So what's the key question here, right? So the key question that I want you to focus on, right, if we're going to be analytical about this is, what are the consequences, right, of who is the head of state? Because here we're talking about not the prime minister, right, or the head of the government, but that we're talking about the head of the state, right? And what are the kinds of powers that he or she has? So the head of state could be a president elected by the people, or could be a dictator who happens to be the president, or it could be a monarch, right? So over the long run, to be more precise, do republics deliver better standards of living than monarchies, or the other way around? That was the question that I was asking myself a couple of years ago. And as I was getting into this research, actually my priors were that republics would actually deliver higher standards of living than monarchies. That was what I was expecting. And you will see in a moment that I just found the opposite, okay? So the way I approached the problem was by thinking, okay, so what in the long run delivers higher GDP per capita, higher wealth in a country, right, per person? And I focused on this literature that says that it's all about the protection of property rights, right? So countries that over time sustain better levels, higher levels of protection of property rights, in the end become more developed and they deliver better standards of living for their populations. And so then the question becomes, what helps a country protect property rights better? And I focused on three things that I think will be familiar to you. First is, well, countries that have fewer internal conflicts over the distribution of wealth are likely to protect property rights better. Also, countries where you limit the time that somebody can stay in government also probably protect property rights better because, as you know, when politicians perpetuate themselves in power, they start doing a lot of crazy things, right? And the third argument, of course, is all about checks and balances, so very familiar to the Americans in the room. To the extent that you can reduce the discretion of the executive branch of government, to the extent that you can reduce the arbitrariness with which they can act, then you're probably minimizing the possibility that property will be confiscated in full or in part through taxes or through expropriations, right? So that's the key argument here. You can see it now on the screen in schematic form. So I have protection of rights increases GDP per capita, but then what protects property rights? Well, we know that internal conflict, executive tenure, and executive discretion reduce the protection of property rights. And then the question becomes, as you can see in the dotted arrows, how do monarchies compare to republics in terms of the extent to which they keep internal conflict under control, they reduce executive tenure, and they dampen executive discretion, okay? So that's what I did. I collected data on 137 countries in the world, all of the ones for which I had complete data on all of the variables, since 1900 all the way to 2010. So I'm including here countries that were founded, that became independent during that time period. During that time period, 33 countries became monarchies upon independence. 3 became monarchies shortly thereafter. 24 countries abolished the monarchy, most famously Russia or Germany or Austro-Hungary and so on and so forth. 4 countries switched back and forth between being monarchies and being republics, and those were Cambodia, Greece, South Africa, and my own home country, Spain. And of course, I took into account the possibility that only the good monarchies would survive, right? The ones that are more stable, that deliver better standards of living for the population. So this is what I found, right? And I was, to tell you the truth, quite stunned at the findings. I can assure you that I crunched the numbers correctly. This paper went through the refereeing process. So 3 very nasty colleagues of mine, probably people whom I know, but anonymously read the paper, and in the end, they decided that it should be published. And as you can see over there, it doesn't matter whether you compare monarchies to all republics, whether you compare monarchies to parliamentary republics like the UK, or you compare monarchies to republics that are democratic, or you compare monarchies that are democracies to other kinds of monarchies, like absolutist monarchies, or the last row at the end, whether you compare democratic monarchies, monarchies that are democratic to republics that are a democracy, right? And the mechanism may change from one comparison to the other, but across the board, what I found was that no matter the comparison, right, monarchies would always deliver, right, over this time period, on average, a higher standard of living for the population. Now, even more surprising, at least to me, was the magnitude of the difference, okay? Because, hey, maybe there was some kind of statistical difference, but it could be just $5 per year, right? So who cares, right? I'm not going to have a king or a queen just for $5, right? But these are my estimates on average in the sample. So the magnitude of the effect ranged between $231 and $789 in annual per capita income for each of the 3 mechanisms. Remember, the mechanisms are social conflict, second one was executive tenure, and the third one was executive discretion. And if a monarchy actually uses all 3 mechanisms, then the increase in per capita income would be about $1,500 per person per year, right? So these are not small effects. So I have no way of finishing my presentation than saying that it does pay, apparently, to have a king or a queen, okay? At least from the point of view of the GDP per capita that is generated. So in case you don't believe me, you should be asking yourself at this point whether you would prefer to have a head of state, one of these individuals, or you would prefer to have one of these individuals, okay? And then think about, don't focus on the shirtless one only. Think about how or the extent to which they protect property rights. And then what are the implications of that for the GDP per capita of that country over time? Thank you so much.